So glad to see all of you this morning. It's good to see each one. When you have a lot of folks that are out of town or not feeling well and aren't able to be with us, it makes everybody present that much more precious, isn't it? that you're all here. And certainly feel the same way about our visitors. We're sure happy that you've come to be with us today. We're thankful that you're here to encourage us, and we can hopefully encourage you in the faith. The lesson this morning, Get Ready to Move, of course, has to do with upcoming events that were announced Wednesday night by the elders. We've just got a few more weeks in this building. We, of course, sold the building to the school. They are going to be building a performing arts center right back over here. And they've moved up their schedule. There's a lot of hard work being done and a lot of red tape being worked through by the elders on our new building. And there's going to be a time that we're going to have to be in temporary quarters starting the first week of August. So we don't have long to get ready. We'll be meeting at the elementary school up the street. The school has provided us a place that we're able to meet, and we all need to, of course, pull together, determine we're going to persevere and work together to encourage each other so that we can get through this temporary dwelling place to get to a permanent building that is going to be better than the one we've got now, and we can look forward to growing and having good times in the future. But we have to go through trials and inconvenience before that happens. And of course, we all need to pull together and try to practice patience with one another and with our leadership. And I thought we would look at some Bible characters and Bible history where people of God had to move. You know, sometimes you got to move. This is the third time that this has happened since I've been preaching. We built a new building while I was preaching in Francis. Had to leave our old building and move into the new one. And the same thing in California and Indio. We got in a new building. It was all wonderful days when you finally get in that building and everybody's happy and the job is done. But there's some inconvenience in the meantime. Well, Abraham, he was called to leave his home down here in Ur of the Chaldees, down in the southern part of what would be Iraq today, and travel all the way around to the promised land, to a place he'd never seen by God. And God had big plans for his future, just like we got big plans and wonderful things to come. But he had to leave where he was at and be a sojourner. We're told in Acts chapter 7 and verses 2 through 4, Stephen recalls it and says, he said, "Hear me, brethren and fathers, the God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran, and said to him, leave your country and your relatives and come into the land that I will show you. Then he left the land of the Chaldeans and settled in Haran. And from there also his father died. And God had him move to this country in which you are now living." So Abraham had to pick up and move. It's like we don't have a choice. We've got to move. So it's time to move on down the road. God's got better things to show us. And he got, first of all, to Haran up here in Syria, and stayed there for a period of time until his father Terah died, and God called him again to move on. It says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great. So you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." He had a lot to look forward to, didn't he? There were wonderful things were going to come when he finally got to that new location. There were going to be blessings for his children and for it to become a great nation. And all of the people in the world were going to be blessed through Abraham's seed in the future. So a lot of good reasons to pick up and go when God said to. In Genesis 12 and verses 4 and 5, you get a picture of what Abraham had to be involved with. And he was 75 years old when he was told to get up and go. So think about being settled in your ways. Well, he obeyed when God called him. So Abram went forth as the Lord had spoken to him and Lot, and went with him. And now Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran, and Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his nephew, and all their possessions which they had accumulated, and the persons which they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and thus they came to the land of Canaan. We're told that all of this was done by faith. He trusted God, he trusted his promises, and that God had better things in store for him, so he had a faith that obeyed. That's what we need to have. A faith we're going to go where God sends us, and we're going to walk by faith to get there. It says, by faith, Abram, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he lived as an alien in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. So it wasn't a strange thing for him to live as a pilgrim. He knew this world wasn't his home. He wanted to get to a heavenly land. And of course, if you're listening to this lesson, and maybe you're not part of this move or whatever, you can still think about that heavenly home, right? You're moving to that place. This land, this whole world is not our home, just a temporary place. And we're going to live with God. We're all on a sojourn. Israel, they had a similar announcement given to them. They had lived in the land of Egypt for 400 years. And then the plagues came upon the Egyptians through the staff and the power of God that was working through Moses. And finally, that last plague was going to come. So they had the Passover meal after the lamb's blood had been shed and put on the doorpost and on the lintel. And they were to eat that meal ready to get out of that land and go to a better land that God was going to give them. They had a long trip of living in tents that they had to go through before they got there, but God told them to get ready when they ate that Passover. We're told in Exodus 12 in verses 11 and 12, now you shall eat it in this manner, with your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And God did those things, and those people got the word in the middle of the night that Pharaoh and the Egyptians were asking them to leave. And they had to leave that land and just grab what they could and head out of that land to go to the promised land that God had in store for them. And so they moved out. And we're told in Exodus 12 and verse 34, so the people took their dough before it was leavened, with their kneading bowls bound up in the clothes on their shoulders. In chapter 12, 37 to 39, now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot. Aside from children, a mixed multitude also went with them, along with flocks and herds and a very large number of livestock. And they baked the dough which they had brought out of Egypt into cakes of unleavened bread, for it had not become leavened since they were driven out of Egypt, and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. So you talk about we got 6 weeks to get ready to get out of here, but think about them. They got today, you're out of here. Just anything you could grab. Didn't have time for the bread to rise till you were out of town. But it all ended up well in the end, didn't it? It all turned out well. Once they got to Mount Sinai, they got the marching orders on when to leave in Numbers chapter 10 in verses 14 through 28 to march on to the land of promise. So they had to break camp there at Sinai and head out. And we're given a detailed description of all of the things that they did in an orderly fashion. Of course, we're so thankful we got elders and deacons that they could get all of these things organized so that we could move out as well. They had to, line up in all special order when they marched out. They had the trumpets would blow and the Spirit of God would arise, the cloud, to announce the time for them to move from the camp. They had the ark out in front of them, and Judah was the first tribe with their banner to lead the first 3 tribes out, followed by the Gershonites, those Levites that took care of the curtains and the wagons, and then the Merarites, they had the frames and the 4 wagons with them, and then came the Reubenites, the next tribe with their banner, and those 3 tribes together, and then the Kohathites with the priest and all of the vessels for the tabernacle would go next. So they organized themselves according to God's direction to make an orderly exit. And of course, we got to do the same thing. You got to work together to get this move taken care of. And then there were a number of stops on their way to the promised land before they were able to enter into their new home. I think about their trip, we might have, hopefully, this time next year, we'll be in a new building somewhere. They took 38 years to get where they were going because they made a lot of mistakes that we don't want to make on their way to their home. They'd have just been faithful, not complained, worked together, had faith, they'd have entered into that land right off. But instead, they got detoured. Well, there's 42 different campsites that are mentioned that they stayed at. These are just the main ones where, some important events took place in the book of Numbers. And we want to focus on a few of those and a few of the things that happened. They went after Sinai to Taberah, and then to Kibroth Hattaavah, and there were trouble at all of these places with complaining about the move, complaining about the struggles getting to the promised land. And we have some foreshadowing of the problems to come with an unfaithful generation of people. One thing the story in the book of Numbers tells us all about: when you're moving, you better not complain. Don't grumble. Let's all be positive-minded and think about what we have to look forward to. We're told about the way, and they were grumbling and complaining about it being a way of adversity that they were walking through on those days after they left Mount Sinai. And because they were complaining against the Lord and against Moses, God sent fire into the outskirts of the camp and burned up some of the people because of their complaining. So Taberah, burning, was the name of that particular place that they camped. And certainly there's a warning given for all future generations that although we may face trials and struggles in this life, before we reach our final home, that we should not be grumblers and complainers against God, but trust Him. Then they travel on to the next place, Kibroth Hattaavah, and it's called the Graves of Greed. They wanted food. They were complaining about the manna that they had. They were tired of eating the manna that God had provided for them with the dew each morning. And there was a rabble that started the complaint. And then as it starts off, it's just a few people complaining. And then the whole group is leavened by that. And they all begin to complain to Moses that we're tired of this manna. We want meat to eat. And so God listened to Moses when he was discouraged, came before God. The leadership got down, and God said He was going to give them food. They'd have so much food, so much meat to eat, it'd come out their nose. He sent quail into the camp. And Moses even had his doubts about how in the world could there be enough food for all of us out here. They were migrating quail that were sent into the camp. And they filled up jars and jars full of these things and were greedily eating them before they let them dry out like they should have done, what the practice was. And they all became sick and nauseated, and a number of them died over greed and complaint on the road. Then you get over to chapter 12. It's just one episode after another, isn't it, in the book of Numbers? Then even Moses' own family got to complaining about the way he was running things. Miriam and Aaron complained about his wife. And it really wasn't about his wife. Isn't that the way it works a lot? People complain, they're aggravated over something else. And then they find something to pick on you about. So they were picking on him about his wife. But really it was about, we're all prophets like you. We should, you take too much on yourself. You got too high profile, basically. And so they went in and stood before God. glory of God appeared. And he pointed out, I got a special relationship with Moses. God's the one that gave him that position. He picked him out to be the mediator. He talks to him mouth to mouth, face to face, like he doesn't talk to anybody else. And when the glory of the Lord departed, Miriam was leprous for complaining about the leadership God chose to lead his people with. So we don't want any complaining about how things are going, right? We need to learn from the lessons of the past and make sure that we all stay united behind those that have been appointed to lead, and not have the kind of things that had happened to Hazeroth. Well, then they got up to Kadesh Barnea, and they sent the 12 spies into the land. One tribe, one spy for each tribe. They went from the north of the land all the way to the bottom for 40 days. They spied out this land of milk and honey, the land of Canaan, where they were going to get to enter in. And those spies came back and brought back a sample of the fruit of the land. On one pole between two men, they were carrying one giant cluster of grapes that came out of that land to show what kind of wonderful fruit that it had and what a good land it was, just like God had promised. But then they began to give out an evil report to the people. They found it to be a land that devours its inhabitants. I guess there's lots of war that's in that land. A lot of hostile people in the land of Canaan. Why? They were giants in the land. They kind of talk about how big all the people there, we just felt like grasshoppers in their sight. And they have strong fortified cities in the land that we can't conquer. And they gave out an evil report to the people. And we're told that the people cried all night for their children that weren't going to be able to enter in and to take that land. And they turned on Moses, and they turned on Joshua and Caleb that were telling them by all means we should go up and take that land. God is going to make them our prey. Nobody can stand against us with God, but they wouldn't listen. They were even going to stone them to death. And God's glory appeared at the tabernacle again. And he was going to wipe them all out, and Moses prayed for the people and interceded. And so God spared the nation. But he told them they're not going to go into his rest. They're not going to have that promised land. It's going to be for their children that they were crying about, not getting to enter the land. That young generation is going to grow up and get the land. These grumblers and complainers, all of the old folks, they're not going to get to go in. It's going to be the young people that are going to get to go in. And they'll get to have the land for the next 38 years. They're going to wander about in the wilderness until that whole generation dies out. And then the young people can enter in. And, you know, that next generation was a faithful generation that trusted God. And they got to enter into that promised land. Well, Joshua and Caleb, they got to go in because they had a different spirit. We need to have a spirit like Caleb and Joshua. They trusted in the Lord wholly. What happened to those 10 spies? Well, God's judgment was that they should die. Those 10 evil men that discouraged the people of God, they were put to death with a plague and died. You know, the people decided, well, no, we will go in the land. We'll go ahead and take it. And Moses said, you're not going to be successful. And they went up the hill, and the Amorites defeated them, drove them back down with big loss. Then they were turned back into the way of the Red Sea and began to wander around in the wilderness for many years. During that period of time, there was another rebellion that broke out from those that were dissidents against the authority of Moses and Aaron. It was led this time by Korah, who was a Levite, who wanted to be a priest. Like Aaron, he thought everybody ought to be able to be a priest. And Dathan and Abiram, they were from the tribe of Reuben. They're the oldest tribe. They've been kind of passed over. They think they ought to be in charge. So they lead a rebellion. And they get 250 other Levites to join in this rebellion, to want to be priests. It's not good enough to be Levites. We want to be in charge. We want to be the priests. And they got the whole congregation to go along with this. They said the whole congregation's holy, not just the house of Aaron, not just Moses. The whole congregation is holy. And so we all ought to be priests. Well, they forgot about God. God's the one that decides who can be a priest. He's the one that decides the qualifications for leadership. That's all up to God to take care of that part. So they reject Moses' leadership. They said he failed. these Reubenites, to give them the promised land, and he's been lording it over them, and he's deceived them, blinded their eyes. And then God gives the pronouncement against the people. Their tents of these men are going to be swallowed up by the earth. They're going to go down in a way nobody's seen before. Everybody better get away from their tents, these complainers and rebels. And I think a lot of people cleared out. Even some of their own family cleared out from their tents. And then the earth opened, and they fell down alive into the pit, and it closed back up over them. There were 250 Levites that thought they ought to be priests, and they were told, get your fire pans and come to the temple, stand before the Lord and offer your incense. And God sent fire out of his presence and burned up all 250 men. And after the fire went out, they were ordered to take up their bronze fire pans and beat them flat and put them on the sides of the altar of burnt offerings as a memorial. They were holy because they'd been presented before God so that people could remember what happened. Well, after God had shown where he stands and that it is the men he's appointed to lead that are in charge, and the people should accept that, they rebelled again and said, all of these people died because of you, Moses. And God sent a plague among them. And 14,700 of them were killed by the plague. Moses cried out for the people and cried before God that there could be some remedy. And Aaron, the one they didn't want to be the priest, he carried a censer in his hand and went between the living and the dead and stopped the plague. So maybe they should trust in Moses and trust in the leadership that was given to them there. Well, they wander around to a number of different dwelling places that are mentioned in the book of Numbers. And then finally, towards the end of that 38 years, they finally end up again back here at Kadesh Barnea, where they came with and sent out the spies. They're back there again. And when they come there, there's a natural oasis that's there in the desert. And there wasn't enough water when they got there. And so the people begin to complain again. I want you to see the route that they're going to take. There's a highway. The King's Highway goes right through Edom, and then you go right up through Moab, and that would be the easy path to take. But the Edomites aren't going to let them. So they're going to have to go way down, out around in this terrible desert out here on another road to try to get to the promised land, and that's going to lead to some more quarreling and complaining. When they get there in Numbers chapter 20, they reach Kadesh Barnea. There's a picture of what it looks like today. You can see right in the middle of a pretty terrible desert, there's this oasis, and you can see the trees, and it's kind of a crack in the earth. You can go right up into Judah from there. And that's where Israel was camped out at this time. And they had a shortage of water, and then they began to oppose and complain about Moses, just like they'd done so many times in the past. And God tells them to go out and speak to the rock and bring forth water for these people. And Moses loses his temper on this occasion. He was a very meek and humble man, but I guess the people kind of wore him down. He kind of cracks up and loses his composure on this occasion. It says in chapter 20 and verses 10 through 12, and Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, listen now, you rebels, shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came forth abundantly, and the congregation and their beasts drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you have not believed me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. So sometimes the complaining can get to the leaders, and they can crack up and not act right? They kind of lost their cool. They forgot who they were representing. They're appointed to this position by God. They're there to represent God, to bring glory to God. And they get aggravated and go out, shall we bring forth water for you? Leave God all out of it. And then instead of speaking to the rock, he hits it twice, which that's not what God said to do. We're told in the book of Psalms, in Psalms 106, 32 and 33, they also provoked him to wrath at the waters of Meribah, which is the water of quarreling, the water of strife, so that it went hard with Moses on their account, because they were rebellious against his spirit. He spoke rashly with his lips. He wasn't supposed to say the things he said that day and represent it that way. And as a result, God made an example out of him for all of those that would stand before God's people in the future. That we never forget that we represent God and it's all about God's glory. It's not about us. And we can't let complaining get to us and cause us to speak in a way that we shouldn't speak. You know, they set a stumbling block for Moses there. But Moses was still responsible for tripping over it, and he didn't have to. And, you know, people might tempt us to get involved in sin, but we don't have to give in. There's always a way out without sin that we've got to choose. Then they have a problem with their neighbors on the detour to get to their permanent home in the promised land. They had neighbors that gave them a hard time and tried to make things difficult for them. I don't know what lays ahead for us in this next year or before we reach our rest in heaven. But I'm sure there'll be problems that will arise, and people may throw problems in our way. Edom refused them passage. They came out, they said, we won't use any of your water, we won't eat anything, we'll just go right on down the highway and pass right through your land. If anything's damaged, we'll pay for it. And they sent out an army to stand on the border, threatening them that we're going to go to war if you try to come down this road. And so they had to turn around and go a different way. And the way was very difficult going down there to Ezon Geber, all the way down here to the Red Sea, and then have to turn and go back up through this terrible desert that's there. And there was a lot of impatience. It said they got impatient with the way. And the people began to complain. And there were serpents sent by God among them that were biting people, and they were dying from this poison. But the people repented. They confessed their sins. And Moses interceded for them, and God sent a remedy. He didn't take away the serpents, but he sent a cure for the bites. They took a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. And if the people would run to that serpent and look at it, God would heal them from the poison. So they had to have faith in the remedy that God set forth. And obedience was necessary. It wasn't enough just to believe it. You had to believe enough to get up and go and look at that serpent. We're told in the New Testament that Jesus Christ is that serpent that's been raised up on the pole for us. Just as that serpent was raised up in the wilderness by Moses, God has raised up Christ on the cross to die for our sins. And if we'll believe in Him, we can have eternal life. We need to believe in Him. We need to have an active faith and do what He commands us to do. We're all on the spiritual move. We all got to get spiritually ready, because this home that we have here is not permanent. We're told in Luke chapter 12 and verse 35, be dressed in readiness and keep your lamp lit. We all got to be ready to pick up stakes and depart from this life, because any day our name could be called and this life will be over. So you better keep your light lit every day and be ready to go. In look of Ephesians, a way to stay ready and prepared to move, says, having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. We need to read our Bibles. We need to know what the gospel teaches. We need to be prepared every day to head out. In 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 13, therefore prepare your minds for action. Keep sober in spirit. Fix your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Don't let anything distract your mind from that final dwelling place that we're all seeking to enter into, because it's all going to be worth it. So it's time to move. And we have to move if we're going to see better things. So let's rejoice that the process is about to get started. And there's a place in the future for us and our children, grandchildren, where they can do good things in service to the Lord. And there are many bright days ahead. By faith, we need to trust God's providence. It's like Abraham did, those leaving out of Egypt. Abraham, Israel, The church at Jerusalem was scattered because of the persecution started by Saul. And they went about everywhere preaching the Word of God. They didn't get discouraged. They picked up and moved other places and began to preach and to teach. They had to move, and that's the way it happens a lot in life. Orderly move needs to be made. We need to trust our God and our appointed leaders that we've been blessed with. And we have no complaining, no grumbling, no losing of patience because the way is difficult. The road to the new home's got a lot of adversaries, a lot of adversity there, but we can get through it and come out better on the other side. We need to do what people have always needed to do, trust and obey. So, brethren, I hope that you'll take this to heart. I'll take it to heart, that we'll all think about these examples and not repeat the mistakes, but do the things that are right. This time we want to extend the Lord's invitation to those that are present this morning. If you've not obeyed the gospel of Christ, we want to encourage you to trust and obey.